Welcome to Hard Beautiful Journey, where we embrace vulnerability as our superpower and let courage light our path. I'm Tiff Carson, here to share heartfelt stories of healing, grief, and resilience. Each week, I'll talk with guests from experts to everyday heroes about their journeys through adversity. Together, we'll uncover the beauty that emerges from life's challenges and how each experience can spark profound growth. Join us on this courageous journey of connection and transformation. Imagine this. You're holding your child after a long, exhausting day. They're crying, you're overwhelmed, and suddenly you're not just reacting to the moment in front of you, but something deeper stirs. Maybe it's a flood of emotions from your own childhood, a trigger that you never saw coming, and in that instant, you realize this isn't just about today. It's about everything that came before. My guest today, Emily Cleghorn, knows this struggle firsthand. As an award-winning trauma recovery coach, author, and speaker, she helps moms who are healing their own childhood trauma while raising the next generation. She's on a mission to break cycles, untrigger motherhood, and create ripples of healing that lasts for generations. So if you've ever felt like you're fighting battles that started long before you became a parent, this episode is for you. Let's dive in to another episode of Hard Beautiful Journey with Emily Cleghorn. Hello, Emily. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me today.
I am really looking forward to this conversation because I have had some challenging parenting moments that I know are going to resonate with me, let alone my other listeners. But before we dive in to your expertise and work, I want to start with something personal. Can you take us back to a moment in your life when you realized that your own trauma was showing up in motherhood, and what did that moment teach you?
Oh my. For that, I think I'd have to go back to the very beginning. I was maybe 3 or 4 days postpartum, and I was sitting on my couch looking at my daughter sleeping in her chair, and this flood, I call it the trauma freight train, washed over me. And it was sheer terror of being the mom and hurting her that I had experienced. And in that moment, my nervous system was telling me to run like hell as fast as my legs would carry me out of that situation because it wasn't safe. But somehow I was able to discern that if I did that, I was going to be repeating the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so through all of that is a very messy time for me, very heavy time, probably some of the darkest days and weeks that I think I've ever had. I knew that I had to make a choice. I could listen to that instinctual survival part of my nervous system telling me to run like hell, or I could stay and face whatever it was that I needed to heal and be the mama that I never experienced for my daughter and later my son. Mm-hmm. And so the choice I made was to stay, and that's what brings me here today. And it's been an incredible journey
of navigating that. So
yeah.
was it a specific trigger that started this journey for you? Because you talk a lot about navigating those triggers that come up as a mom, right? So those usually come out of nowhere. Those triggers.
Yeah, and they're like time machines.
Mm-hmm. Like instant time machines.
Yeah.
You're back there. So how did you first recognize that your reactions weren't just in the moment parenting reactions and that it was something about your childhood trauma. What was that moment for you?
So I stayed quiet for a long time about how I was feeling after my daughter was born. I absolutely hated being a mom.
Mm-hmm.
I hated it. And it's not to say anything about my daughter or the relationship that we had. It was because every maternal example that I had had in my life was not a safe one.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to be that unsafe person in my daughter's life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took me a really, really long time to understand that. I thought in that moment I was just a bad mom or a bad human. And I went through infertility to achieve my daughter. And so the level of guilt for trying so hard to achieve a healthy pregnancy and now have this beautiful baby who actually looked like baby me,
Mm-hmm.
which adds another level of complexity to the situation.
Yep.
And was so heavy. It was like carrying the weight of the world. So I stayed quiet for a long time. And I inherited my grandfather's research. You gotta learn as much as you can about the things that you're experiencing. So I did a lot of research looking at the symptoms of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, baby blues, all of those types of things. And I could check some of the boxes, but it wasn't everything there. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, but there's more to it. It's not just postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety or baby blues. It's more than that. And it was like every repressed emotion that I didn't deal with during my life previous to being a mother was right there, center court, demanding for me to deal with it immediately. And, postpartum, you're trying to figure out how to take care of this tiny human while being sleep deprived. I was completely triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I was probably triggered for the first year of my daughter's life.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot that
Mm-hmm.
was demanding to be dealt with. And so it took a long time to untangle all of that and figure it out. And I could say, "Oh, but it's all good. I figured it all out." But what I want listeners to understand is that if you're in this space, if you've had a traumatic childhood or trauma happen, even birth trauma,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a real thing too,
Mm-hmm.
it takes time to process because, especially with childhood trauma, the neural pathways that developed in my brain as a child to protect me, to sense the danger, were firing on all cylinders when I had my daughter. And so it took a long time to disarm, for
Mm-hmm.
lack of a better term, that firing squad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it takes a long time because your triggers have a neural pathway. It didn't happen overnight, and so healing doesn't happen overnight.
I am so, first of all, I am so proud of you for recognizing that you were meant to go on a healing journey for yourself first
Yeah,
so that you
thank you.
could be the mom that you are for your kids. And I'm just so proud of you for recognizing that and not shying away from it because it is hard work.
Oh, yeah.
What was the hardest thing for you to accept on your healing journey and start doing that work? Like, what was that? How hard was it for you to just say, I'm doing this, I'm going in?
I think the hardest thing for me to accept was that I couldn't do it on my own. From those really early days when I was feeling awful and probably perhaps triggered the most when I felt like a horrible person because I hated being a mom, I couldn't carry that alone. So from that early time, realizing that I couldn't carry it alone and I had to let my husband in on what was going on, but then realizing that I couldn't keep trudging through and feeling like is just supposed to be hard. And going to my doctor and saying, "Hey, I think I have PTSD."
Yeah.
It took me 32 years to get diagnosed, or maybe it was 33. I keep forgetting how old I am.
I get it.
32 or 33 years to get diagnosed with PTSD from trauma that happened when I was a little child.
So you help moms become the mothers that they needed as children, just like you needed that when you were a child. And Emily, that is such a powerful mission. What did you need as a child that you've now learned to give yourself?
I needed someone to listen and not tell me that my feelings were wrong, not tell me that I just need to suck it up and get over it and see me for who I am and understand that although life went back to normal, quote unquote normal, after I stood up for myself as a 7-year-old child and said, I'm not going home because they hurt me. Although life went back to normal the next day, and I use the term normal lightly,
Mm-hmm.
I was not normal. And so, and also someone, a mama who understands how her actions and reactions impact me as her daughter
Mm-hmm. Words,
and
actions.
apologize.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of emotions coming up right now for me too. That last one that you just said, just acknowledgement
Mm-hmm.
and apologize.
Mm-hmm.
And those two things, I'm sorry, and acknowledging it, hold a
Mm-hmm.
lot of power in a child's
Yeah.
life and
Yeah.
in your life
Mm-hmm.
because it releases shame.
Yeah.
It releases shame for both people. So, how do you help moms step out of that shame when they've unconsciously repeated the patterns from their past? How do you help them say, wow, I need to recognize this, acknowledge it, say I'm sorry, and then move on from the shame?
Well, the first step is building self awareness because if we trauma survivors, we are not connected to our bodies because it wasn't safe. And so we may not even be aware that we're triggered when we're triggered. We may not understand what anger feels like in our body or what sadness or disappointment or heck, joy feels like in our bodies. And so the first step is feeling safe to connect with your body and get curious about what those emotions feel like and what elicits those emotions. And so, one of the tools that I give my clients is I encourage them to journal out their triggers, because over time, first of all, it allows you to reflect on a situation, how you handled it, what caused it, all of that type of data. But as you continue that practice, you are able to look at it and see patterns. You'll be able to understand what your triggers are based on what you're journaling about. Mm-hmm. You'll understand that if you're getting triggered every time your kid throws a temper tantrum, it's not about your child's temper tantrum, first of all. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's the volume that your child gets to when they're throwing a temper tantrum. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's the emotion that the child is showing, because when you were a kid, you weren't allowed to show emotion. Mm-hmm. Understanding these patterns and having that data is hugely helpful and informative.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I love that so much. As you were giving those examples, like the loud one for me, all three of my kids were diagnosed with ADHD and ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. And let me tell you, the volume in our house was extreme at many times. And I remember telling my ex-husband, my mom, like, I can't handle the volume in here. I can't handle it. It's too much. I'm overstimulated, and like it would throw me into a trigger. And it took work for me to find out the root of those triggers too, right? And be okay with it and give myself grace. And instead of losing my shit, I would actually go outside, or I would remove myself from that moment as much as possible. If my ex-husband wasn't there, like, I would make sure that they were safe, obviously, but I had to remove myself from that situation in order for me to not do something that I would regret, say something that I would regret. Right? Yeah. So it takes a lot of work to acknowledge and see yourself. So that is a big one.
Yeah. And the key with this is to have a mindset of curiosity rather than judgment, because that judgment isn't going to help you.
Nope.
It's going to hurt you more than anything.
That's so important.
So understanding what your triggers are, but then asking yourself, I kind of overreacted when Junior was doing X, Y, or Z. I wonder why. I wonder what that's about.
That it's not just a parenting moment. It's not just the child doing something that's upsetting you. What is the deeper meaning behind that reaction?
Yeah.
And that's where you'll get to the good stuff.
Yeah, it is. And then, developing
good, but hard stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, as trauma survivors, we are not the most compassionate with ourselves. And so developing a sense of self-compassion, I have actually developed a 30-day program. It's an email program that helps remind you of being compassionate towards yourself. Because, a lot of us, me included, the stuff that we say to ourselves, we would never in a million years say that to our best friend.
So true. I actually did an Instagram post about that a couple of years ago. Things that I would never say to my daughter.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom, I just said, so why am I saying them to myself?
Yeah.
And it's so true that we are fine just saying crap to ourselves over and over and over again. And that does no good.
Yeah. We become our own abuser.
We do. We become our own abuser. And so when we start working on this, I call it the messy middle of the healing journey. It's so important that we recognize that when we're doing that, we are actually continuing the generational trauma.
Yep.
So, what is one small, tangible practice that a mom can start doing today to shift from a reactive to responsive parenting?
Pause before you react.
That is so hard.
Oh, it is. But if you can pause and take a deep breath. Now, I know as trauma survivors, it's hard for us to take a deep breath because waiting for the other shoe to drop, you breathe very shallowly, if that's a word. But really in through your nose, hold it for a couple of seconds, and then breathe out through your mouth. And that kind of helps to activate your parasympathetic system instead of being in your fight or flight, freeze or fawn response. And you know what? Everybody has one of those responses that is default for them. It's human. We were made that way, but you don't have to live in it.
So I'm curious, how has gratitude played a part in your journey in rewiring your brain from trauma response to more grounded parenting?
Gratitude changes how you think. And so if I can remind myself that I am thankful that I am safe, and just sit with that. I am thankful that I am loved, because little Emily didn't always feel loved. She wasn't always loved, let's be honest. That goes into what I was saying earlier about rewiring the neural pathways in your brain. It lets your nervous system know that, oh wait, I've had to be on edge for a really long time, but now I don't have to be. Now I'm safe, and it won't change overnight, but it will change eventually. I can remember a few years ago when my son was throwing a temper tantrum, and I handled it calmly. I didn't throw a temper tantrum of my own. And it hit me. I was like, whoa, I dealt with that without losing my crap. Holy moly.
It's huge.
And it's huge because in that moment, I was the safe place for my son to feel his feelings.
I had one of those. I had one of those too. And I wrote about it in my book, but I'll share it here as well. So there was something that happened between my dad and my brother. And basically what he did is he told my brother to leave. And this is when he was 13 years old. And it was in a moment of anger. It was in a moment of, I'm sure, alcohol use and all of that, right? And there was a moment when I was with my boys and we were getting ready to go to a doctor's appointment, and they were a nightmare. Let's just say it was awful. They were so disrespectful. They were not listening. They were screaming. It was hell. And it just escalated out of control. And I remember yelling the same words at them that my dad said to my brother, that they needed to leave. They needed to get out of my home. I don't want to see you anymore. I don't want you to come back. Like, you name it. It was, everything just spewed out of my mouth. And I went into my room to finish getting ready. And I just started bawling my head off. I was just like, what did I just do? What did I just do? I just did the same thing. And I came out of the room and they were both crying. They were putting on their backpacks. And one of my little guys looked at me. They were probably 9, almost 10 years old. And he just gave me this look. And he was just like, I don't know where we're supposed to go. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. And sorry. And I just felt my brother's pain in that moment of being told to leave and never come back. And I could have ignored that. I could have ignored it and felt all the shame and don't address it. Just sweep it under the rug. Just ignore it. Nothing to see here. And instead we got in the car and I made the decision to change the direction of my kids' experience and stop the generational trauma. And I said, I am so sorry for what I just said to you in that house. I should never have said those words to you. And I know how much it hurt your heart. And I want you to know I never want you to leave my home, our home. I never want that to happen. And I said those things because of this, because this is how I was feeling. How did it make you feel? And I let them say how it made them feel. And we had the most beautiful conversation out of something that was so awful. And at the end, one of my little guys said, Mom, you know, it's okay for people to see you cry. And I was just like, you bet it is. And it was that moment where I was proud of myself for saying, I don't need to keep doing this. I don't need this to keep going on. I want to show them a different way. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And that's what you're passionate about, is creating positive ripples for our future generations, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what do you think it's going to truly take to break those cycles, and how moms will know that they are on the right path?
I think it's going to take a lot of education, because there's a generational pattern where if you were brought up in a family, there's really toxic narrative that whatever happens within our family stays within our family. And we don't talk about the hard stuff. I am of the belief that emotional wounds are really no different than a physical cut or scrape. That cut or scrape needs air in order to heal. And so in order for our emotional stuff to heal, we have to give it air. We have to talk about it. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's hard, but we have to talk about it. And sometimes it's not possible to communicate with someone who hurt you and get an apology. Sometimes people don't think they caused any harm. They don't think they need to apologize. But understanding that sometimes you don't need the other person to release all of the emotion that is around whatever they did to you. And being willing to apologize to our kids, because they're people too. They have emotions too. They may not be the size, they may not be fully grown yet, but they still have feelings. They still have a nervous system, a developing one that is very sensitive. And being able to put our ego aside and do the work on ourselves so that we can equip our children with the emotional intelligence that wasn't gifted to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not about blaming other generations because of their crap and how they parented and all of that stuff. They didn't know what they didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But we know more, and so we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
When you know better, you can do better.
I think a big one too is just being okay with being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to for me. Like another one for me was I was severely bullied in middle school, and it was starting to happen with one of my little guys. And instead of just saying, it's going to be okay, don't worry, don't listen to them, I actually was vulnerable and shared my experience with them, with all of my kids. And this is how extreme it got. This is how I was feeling in that moment. I never thought I was going to have friends again. I was devastated. Like I actually spoke about and used words about the emotions that I felt in that moment, in that time in my life. And so that they could really understand, okay, mom really gets this. I really can go and talk to her about this if this continues, or just give them that safe space and that compassion, and that they will then feel like they can be vulnerable with me. And so that is hard for people to do. And there are people that are still in the process of healing childhood wounds, or don't even know that they have childhood wounds. What lessons from your work can they apply to their own journeys to start that process and to recognize that, okay, maybe I need to look at some things?
Well, I would say first and foremost, get curious. Get curious about your reactions. Get curious about why or how your family operates. Get curious about all of that stuff, not for the purpose of like judging or shaming or any of that kind of thing, but being aware. Awareness is a tool.
Big time.
And having an awareness and asking questions may help you a lot. There may also be family members, if you start poking and asking questions, they may get grumpy with you because they're happy in their misery.
Yes.
It says nothing about you. It
Yeah.
says more about them.
Emily, this conversation has been so powerful. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If a mom out there is listening to this in tears, like I just was, feeling seen for the first time, but they're unsure where to start, what would you say to her? Would it be get curious?
Get curious and find a community that understands you. Okay? So, not all communities are made equal. Not all trauma recovery communities are made equal. Some are just content to compare battle stories. Finding a community like the Hard Beautiful Journey community or the Mamahood After Trauma community, where it's healing focused, supportive, loving, is an asset. It's a powerful asset.
Very powerful to find what you just said, the right community. And another example I'll give is when our kids were diagnosed with ADHD. I needed to be in rooms, in online rooms, in spaces where the moms got it. Where like you just say one thing and they're like, oh girl, I get it. Or like, holy crap, what happened today? You know, like where they actually truly get what you're going through. Because it's in those rooms and in those moments where you know you are not crazy that you're not alone, and
You're
that
safe.
you're safe. That's the big one, that you're safe and you don't have to feel judged.
Absolutely.
And there's no shame. And it's like, I can be so open and honest in here because you guys get it. You all understand what I'm facing right now. So that is huge, 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 huge advice. So thank you. I'm really, really curious to know about that 30-day thing that you've got, that email. I want that, by the way. Here is another important resource for you to check out, and that is Emily's YouTube channel. It is at Motherhood After Trauma. She has amazing videos on there that you guys should all go and check out. Yeah, I am just so incredibly grateful for this conversation with you today. I end every interview asking my guests what they're grateful for today. What are you grateful for today, Emily?
I'm grateful for this conversation.
Me too. It's brought up so many emotions, but I love it because it's tears. The tears are salve for my heart. That is what I call it, is they're
healing tears.
They're healing tears. And every time I have conversations with people like you, I feel it healing step by step.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Anything else that you're grateful for today? Like spring, maybe, like I am?
Oh, yeah. Spring.
We're both in Canada, so spring is here. It's almost here.
I'm thankful for the mud puddles.
Exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your experience, not just your experience, but how you are taking that experience and wanting to help other moms going through their own journey and making a difference in our future generations. So I'm just so incredibly grateful for you. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for being here for this episode of Hard, Beautiful Journey. I hope today's episode inspired you to embrace your own vulnerabilities and recognize the strength within you. Remember, every story of resilience adds to the beauty of our shared journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review. Your support helps me spread hope and healing to even more listeners. Until next time, keep shining your light and embracing the beauty in your journey. Bye-bye.